I'm going to need you to step aside. The words cut through the crisp autumn air like a blade. Alyssa Carter, clutching the leather folder with her admission documents, blinked, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her heels had barely touched the stone path of Harrington University when Frank Miller, a tall, gray-haired security officer with a badge that caught the morning sun, blocked her path. His voice was neutral, practiced, but his eyes spoke a different language, one of suspicion, of prejudgment. "I'm sorry," Alyssa asked, trying to keep her tone composed. "I said you need to wait right here," he repeated, stepping in front of her. "Until we verify your reason for being here." She held up her documents, the embossed seal of the university catching the light. "I'm a new graduate student, policy and public systems. My orientation appointment is at 10. Diane Holloway should be expecting." Before she could finish, a second figure appeared. Diane Holloway, mid-50s, blazer too tight at the shoulders, hair pinned into a perfect twist, approached with a narrowed gaze and clipped steps. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a greeting. Her eyes scanned Alyssa from head to toe. "And you are?" Diane asked, as if Alyssa hadn't just said it. "Alyssa Carter." "I? Do you have any other form of ID?" Diane interrupted. "Something official?" Alyssa opened her folder and handed over both her driver's license and the admission confirmation email printed on Harrington letterhead. Diane took the papers, gave them a glance, and turned to Frank. "Something doesn't feel right. Let's have her wait outside until we confirm with admissions." "But my appointment is in 5 minutes," Alyssa said, her voice tightening. "There are procedures," Diane said curtly. "We don't just let anyone walk into administration." "Anyone." The word echoed louder than it was spoken. Around them, students moved past, some glancing over, others pretending not to notice. A young white student walked straight through the gates without a word from Frank. Another waved at Diane and received a warm, "Good morning, Jordan." Alyssa felt her cheeks burn. "This is inappropriate," she said. "I followed every protocol. I emailed, I called, Frank raised a hand, palm open like a stop sign. "Ma'am, we're asking you to cooperate." She took a breath. One long, steadying breath. This wasn't new, but it never stopped hurting. "If I were white, dressed in a blazer, would you be questioning me right now?" she asked, her voice quieter, sharper. Diane stiffened. "Excuse me? I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here because I earned my place." Frank looked away. "Let's not escalate," Diane said, her tone falsely calm. "Please step aside while we clear this up." "I'm not stepping anywhere. You've had my ID, my letter, what else do you need? A recommendation from God." Silence. Eyes turning. A professor paused on the steps of the building. A janitor sweeping leaves froze for a moment. "I'll call campus police," Frank muttered. "I dare you," Alyssa said, and for a second no one moved. She saw it all, the double standards, the quiet indignities, the polite rejection cloaked in protocol. She thought of her mother, of the long nights working overtime to pay for prep books, of the scholarships, of the interviews, of how hard she'd fought to be here. And still, this. She turned, walked down the steps slowly, not running, not giving them the satisfaction of haste. But her stomach turned. Her throat closed. Every step away from that building felt like betrayal. Back in her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, she dialed her mother. "They stopped me," she said, "at the entrance, like I didn't belong." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm sorry, baby," Marianne said softly. "Rest for now, and trust me." Trust. But trust in what? Alyssa didn't know yet. The next morning, Harrington University woke to the sharp thrum of helicopter blades slicing through the cold Virginia air. Heads turned skyward as an executive aircraft descended onto the manicured lawn in front of the Belmont Administration Building, the very heart of the institution. It wasn't just rare, it was unprecedented. Deans stepped out of meetings. Students pulled out their phones. Rumors swirled before the wheels even touched the ground. Frank Miller was already at his post, coffee in hand, when the chopper appeared. He stood there blinking, trying to process what he was seeing. Diane Holloway had just arrived, balancing her usual overpriced latte and a stack of folders when the wind from the rotor knocked the cup from her hand. Hot foam splattered down her coat. She swore under her breath. Who approved this landing? Frank muttered, eyes narrowing. I have no idea, Diane said, brushing at her coat with shaky hands. But this better not be some donor stunt. It wasn't. The door to the helicopter opened slowly. The first to step out was a tall man in a tailored navy suit, followed by two attorneys in sleek coats, then a woman with a crisp white blazer and a badge that read Carter Educational Trust. But it was the last figure who made everyone freeze. Alyssa Carter. She stepped down with steady poise, her expression unreadable, eyes forward, chin high. The same young woman they'd pushed away less than 24 hours ago now stood before them, not as an applicant, but as an authority, a gatekeeper, a consequence. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Is that her?" Another said, "That's the girl from yesterday." Phones captured every second, though no one dared approach. Frank instinctively reached for the radio on his belt. Diane didn't move. Inside the administration building, alarms, figurative and administrative, were sounding. Interim President Garrett Calloway was already pacing his office, phone pressed to his ear, as an assistant whispered frantic updates. "They say it's a formal audit," she said. "From the Carter Trust. They've sent a team. It's not just a visit. It's an inspection." Garrett froze. An inspection of what? Admissions, faculty hiring, conduct complaints, internal policies, bias response protocols. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. He'd been warned that their lack of transparency could catch up to them, but he'd always assumed Harrington's prestige would insulate them. The fact that they had, in the past, quietly buried certain complaints or dismissed them as misunderstandings wasn't new. It was survival, but this was something else. When Alyssa entered the building, this time without anyone stopping her, everything seemed to hold its breath. Her steps echoed on the marble floor. Staff members parted like water as she moved through the lobby. She said nothing to Frank. She didn't even glance at Diane. Marion Carter had taught her daughter well. In the boardroom, under soft recessed lighting and portraits of white men in frames too grand for the space, Alyssa sat at the head of the table. The audit began. Policies were questioned. Case files pulled. Names mentioned. Diane's face paled when a folder was set in front of her. One containing reports from the last 5 years, highlighting multiple complaints about her conduct. None had been followed up. All bore her signature. Frank was next. A printed transcript from campus security logs showed a pattern of incidents involving students of color being stopped without probable cause. No formal charges. Just enough to mark patterns. Enough to matter. Throughout it all, Alyssa remained professional, focused. But inside, she churned. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, exposure, correction. And still, beneath the polished voice, beneath the coolness, her heart ached. This wasn't how she wanted to begin her academic journey. She didn't want to enter a space by force. But maybe that was the cost of showing people that presence doesn't always need permission. Outside the boardroom, students buzzed with curiosity. Articles popped up on social media. Carter Trust investigating Harrington. Discrimination allegations spark audit. Photos of Alyssa stepping off the helicopter went viral. One message caught her eye when she checked her phone later that afternoon. "You're making history. Thank you." Sent by a young black freshman she didn't know. That message meant more than the silence of apologies. That night, at home, Alyssa sat across from Marianne, silent. They didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, Alyssa asked, "Did you know?" Marianne looked at her, calm as always. "I knew they'd show you who they really were. I just didn't know how soon." Alyssa stared at her mother. Something shifted in that silence. A question formed in her mind but didn't find voice yet. Instead, she whispered, "They're scared." Marianne nodded once. As they should be. The boardroom felt smaller on the third day of the audit, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. Files were stacked higher now, the polite tone long gone, replaced by clipped sentences and strained breathing. Alyssa sat upright, hands folded, eyes moving slowly from face to face. President Calloway cleared his throat for the third time in under a minute. "Ms. Carter," he said, forcing a careful smile, "we believe we've addressed the concerns raised by your initial experience. Harrington is prepared to issue a formal apology and move forward." Alyssa tilted her head slightly. "Forward without looking back?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but it landed heavy. "Because this audit isn't about one incident. It's about patterns. And patterns come from history." Diane Holloway stiffened in her chair. "With all due respect," she interjected, "I've worked here for over 25 years. I take offense at the implication." Alyssa raised a hand, not sharply, just enough. "Then you'll appreciate context," she said. She turned to the lead attorney beside her, who slid a thin folder across the table. Not thick, not dramatic, just deliberate. The attorney spoke. In 1998, Harrington University hired a policy analyst in the Office of Community Outreach. Her performance reviews were exemplary for 3 consecutive years. In 2001, she was terminated under vague claims of misalignment with institutional values. No formal warning, no documented cause. Her internal complaint citing racial bias was dismissed. The room went quiet. Alyssa looked up, meeting Calloway's eyes. Her name was Marion Carter. Diane's face drained of color. Frank, standing near the wall, shifted his weight. Calloway frowned. "I wasn't aware of this case." "Of course you weren't," Alyssa replied. "It was buried, like many others." Her chest tightened, but she kept going. "That woman was my mother." The words hung there, unadorned, devastating. A murmur rippled through the room. Alyssa stood. "She never told me. Not once. I grew up believing Harrington was just another prestigious institution I hoped to earn my way into. I didn't know that years before I ever set foot on this campus. My mother walked these halls, did her job with integrity, and was quietly pushed out when she became inconvenient." Calloway's voice dropped. "Ms. Carter, I assure you." "You can't assure me of something you didn't bother to remember," Alyssa said. Her composure cracked just enough to show the hurt beneath. "When I was stopped at the gate, when I was questioned like I didn't belong, that wasn't an accident. It was muscle memory, an institution repeating itself." Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears welled, but whether from guilt or fear, no one could tell. Alyssa inhaled slowly. This audit was never about punishment. It was about exposure, accountability, repair. My mother didn't get justice, but maybe the students coming after me will. She paused, then added softly, "And maybe you'll finally learn that inclusion isn't a slogan. It's a practice." Outside, word spread quickly. By evening, the story wasn't just about discrimination, it was about legacy. About a woman erased and a daughter who returned not in anger, but in truth. That night, Alyssa and Marion sat together on the porch, the Virginia air cool between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alyssa asked quietly. Marion smiled sadly. "Because I didn't want your dreams to carry my wounds," she said. Alyssa reached for her mother's hand. For the first time, Harrington University wasn't just facing an audit. It was facing itself. The next morning, the gates of Harrington University stood open, but the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Professors walked with stiff shoulders. Students whispered louder. The press had caught wind of the audit's deeper revelations, and now Marion Carter's name was echoing across national headlines. Alum silenced. The hidden history of Harrington. From dismissed to dismantling. The Carter legacy. Alyssa walked the campus again, but this time not as a stranger. People moved aside out of respect or fear. Either way, she no longer blended into the background. The tension was undeniable. Some students thanked her in passing. Others kept their distance. There was a fragile split forming, not loud but visible in glances and whispers. Several faculty members, especially those in minority support programs, quietly reached out to her, asking to speak, to share their own experiences. Alyssa listened. She recorded. She took notes. It wasn't about revenge. It was becoming a map for change. Yet beneath the progress, something gnawed at her. She had walked into the fire with professionalism and restraint, but the weight of her mother's story, hidden for decades, left a wound she didn't know how to name. Marion stayed quiet through most of it. She didn't want to influence her daughter's choices. But Alyssa could see it in her eyes. The weight she'd carried, the quiet pride, the pain buried beneath decades of silence. Back on campus, President Calloway was scrambling to contain the fallout. Internal committees were being formed. Temporary inclusion councils were announced. But Alyssa saw the performative urgency in it all. They were not leading. They were reacting. Frank Miller had been placed on administrative leave. Diane Holloway had taken personal time. Though Alyssa knew better, it was the institution's way of giving her space to disappear quietly. The board was pushing for a formal statement, but nothing had been released yet. Late one evening, Calloway requested a private meeting with Alyssa in his office. She arrived promptly, flanked by her legal advisor, but Calloway raised a hand. "Please," he said, "just you and me." Alyssa hesitated, then nodded for her advisor to wait outside. She stepped in. The room was lined with mahogany shelves, diplomas, portraits. Tradition dressed as prestige. "I want to apologize," Calloway began. "Not the institutional apology. A personal one." Alyssa said nothing. He continued, "I've been president for 7 years. I inherited a culture I thought I could manage, not change. That was cowardice." Alyssa raised her eyebrows. "You knew about my mother's case?" "No," he admitted. "And that's the problem. No one ever told me, because no one thought it mattered." He paused. "You changed that." Alyssa studied him, searching for sincerity. "Change means nothing if it ends with a press release." "It won't," he said. "The board has approved full review of every hiring and dismissal record from the last 30 years. Your mother's case will be reopened. We're inviting an external oversight panel, people outside Harrington, including you if you're willing." She felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't satisfaction. It was the beginning of accountability. "It's not enough," she said. "But it's something." Outside the office, her phone buzzed. Another message from a student she'd never met. "Because of you, I stayed." Alyssa closed her eyes for a moment. The audit would conclude in days. The helicopter, the boardrooms, the headlines, they would all fade. But what stayed were the seeds, the uncomfortable conversations, the faces that no longer looked away, the truth that had made it to daylight. Marion watched it all quietly from home. She hadn't returned to campus. She didn't need to. Her presence now lived in the change unfolding. But one morning, she received a letter, an official one, from the university. Hand-delivered. It was brief, formal, and sincere. It acknowledged her wrongful termination. It apologized for the erasure of her contribution. It offered to restore her record and invite her to speak at the upcoming Diversity Summit. Marion folded the letter and set it aside. She didn't need the spotlight, but she allowed herself a single tear. Alyssa, standing in the doorway, saw it and said nothing. Some stories don't need to be retold. They just need to be honored. And so the Carter women, quiet forces in a loud world, continued forward, not in triumph, but in clarity. And that, Alyssa knew, was power enough. 2 months later, the trees around Harrington University had shed their golden leaves, and snow threatened the edges of the campus. The audit had concluded. The final report, published publicly, outlined not only Alyssa's experience but a pattern of systemic neglect stretching back decades. Headlines ran again, but with a different tone now, one not of scandal but of reckoning. A university in transition. Legacy of silence, path to change. Harrington had been forced to confront itself, not just through press statements or symbolic hires, but through structural change. Real steps, new leadership in the admissions office, a public database tracking misconduct reports, student and faculty panels with voting power on hiring decisions. But the change that mattered most wasn't printed on paper. It was in the eyes of the students walking those paths. They looked at one another differently now. Looked up, looked around. watched who was missing, who was seen, and who was silenced. Alyssa chose not to return as a student. That door, once so full of hope, had revealed a reality she no longer wished to invest her future in. But she didn't walk away bitter. She walked away clearer. Her work with the Carter Educational Trust deepened. She now led initiatives focused specifically on accountability in elite institutions. She traveled. She spoke. She listened. And she never forgot. On the day Harrington invited her mother to speak at the newly established Marion Carter Center for Institutional Equity, Alyssa stood in the back of the auditorium, unnoticed by most, watching as her mother, in a simple black dress and soft pearl earrings, stepped onto the stage. Marion didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. Her voice, steady and calm, told a different kind of story. One not of bitterness, but of memory, of what was taken, and what was never lost. Dignity, truth, legacy. She ended her speech with one sentence that lingered in the air like incense. No door opened by silence will stay open for justice. The crowd stood. Some cried. Others just nodded, heavy with understanding. Afterward, Alyssa approached her mother, hugged her tight, and whispered, "They finally saw you." Marion smiled. "Because they saw you first." That night, back home, Alyssa sat alone on the porch with a blanket draped over her legs. The world had shifted. Not completely, not enough, but meaningfully. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from a young woman in Boston. "I heard what you did. I want to help others like us. I just needed to know someone had done it before." Alyssa replied simply, "You're not alone." She looked out at the quiet street, exhaled deeply, and let the silence hold her. Not as an absence, but as a space earned. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Now I'm curious. Where are you listening from?